Vivid verses.
The promotion email arrived at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and Adrian Caldwell read it twice before allowing himself a measured smile. Vice President of Strategic Development. Corner office. 30% raise. He'd spent 18 months positioning himself for this, navigating the labyrinth of Garrison and Klein's internal politics with the precision of a chess grandmaster. Every late night, every carefully cultivated alliance, every calculated risk, it had all paid off. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk. Him and Olivia at Lake Champlain last summer, her dark hair catching the golden hour light, both of them laughing at something he could no longer remember. 3 years together. 2 years living in the same apartment in downtown Portland. She was brilliant in her own right, a senior data analyst at Whitmore Financial, the kind of person who could spot patterns in chaos and translate them into actionable intelligence. They made sense together, or so he'd thought. Two ambitious professionals building parallel careers, supporting each other's ascents. He'd celebrated every one of her achievements. Her certification in advanced analytics, her promotion to senior analyst. The time her presentation at the annual conference received a standing ovation. He'd taken her to Marcello's, the Italian place she loved, ordered champagne, listened to her excited recounting of every detail. His phone buzzed. A text from Olivia, working late tonight. Client presentation tomorrow. Don't wait up. Adrian typed back. Got some news. Want to grab a quick dinner when you're done? Even if it's late? The 3 dots appeared, pulsed, disappeared. 5 minutes passed. Then, really swamped. Tomorrow? He studied the message, noting what wasn't there. No curiosity about the news. No reciprocal enthusiasm. Just deflection. Sure. Tomorrow. He closed his laptop with a soft click and sat in the silence of his office. The rest of the floor had mostly emptied out. Through the window, Portland's skyline was beginning its transition from day to night, office lights blinking on in scattered patterns across the buildings. Something had shifted in the past 6 months, subtle enough that he'd initially dismissed it as stress or coincidence. But Adrian hadn't built his career on ignoring patterns. He'd built it on seeing them before anyone else did. Olivia came home at 11:30. Adrian was reading a biography of Robert Caro, making notes in the margins, a habit from his graduate school days that he'd never abandoned. He looked up as she dropped her bag by the door with more force than necessary. "Long day?" he asked. "The longest." She kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch beside him, not quite touching. Henderson kept changing his mind about the data visualization. 3 times. We had to rebuild the entire presentation deck. That sounds frustrating. You have no idea. She rubbed her temples. What was your news? The question came out flat, pro forma. Adrian closed his book, using the moment to study her expression. Fatigue, yes, but something else underneath. A tightness around her eyes. I got the VP position. Oh, a pause that lasted half a second too long. That's great, Adrian. Congratulations. The words were correct. The delivery was wrong. Like a musician playing the right notes, but in the wrong key. He'd heard genuine enthusiasm from her before. It sounded nothing like this. Thanks, he said, keeping his tone light. I know the timing's not ideal with you being so busy. We can celebrate this weekend. Maybe? Sure. Yeah. She stood up abruptly. I need a shower. Early morning tomorrow. He watched her disappear down the hallway. Heard the bathroom door close, the water start. Adrian sat very still, his mind working through the variables. This wasn't the first time. It was becoming a pattern. 3 months ago, when he'd closed the Riverside development deal, the one that had been dying on the vine until he'd restructured the entire financing package, she'd gone quiet for 2 days. He'd attributed it to her own project stress. Before that, When he'd been invited to speak at the National Urban Planning Symposium, she'd suddenly developed a headache on the night of his keynote and stayed at the hotel. Individual data points could be anomalies. Repeated data points formed a trend line. Friday evening, they sat across from each other at Marcello's. The restaurant was busy, but not crowded, filled with the pleasant ambient noise of conversation and clinking glasses. Olivia had ordered the seafood linguine. Adrian had gone with his usual chicken marsala. A bottle of Chianti sat between them, already half empty. "So, VP," Olivia said, twirling pasta on her fork. "That's a big responsibility." "It is. Bigger portfolio, more autonomy. I'll be leading the entire Western region strategy. Lots of travel, I assume." "Some. Mostly Seattle and San Francisco. Nothing too crazy." She nodded slowly, took a sip of wine. I was reading an article about how a lot of these promotions are really just about timing. Right place, right time kind of thing. Adrian set down his fork very carefully. "I'm sorry. Nothing bad. Just that, Murphy was getting ready to retire anyway. They needed someone to slot in. You were available." She said it casually, as if commenting on the weather. "I spent 1.5 years building the case for restructuring the entire department," he said evenly. "The position didn't exist before I proposed it." "Sure, but they were going to create something, right? And you were there." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm not saying you didn't work hard. Just that luck plays a role. Some people catch breaks." The words landed like stones in still water. Adrian took a slow breath, buying himself time to think. This wasn't frustration or fatigue talking. This was deliberate, a calculated diminishment. "You think my promotion was luck?" he asked quietly. "I think a lot of things are luck." She reached for her wine glass. "Can we not make this a big thing? I'm trying to be supportive." Interesting choice of words, he thought. Trying to be supportive. Not being supportive. Trying. As if support were a burden she was attempting to shoulder rather than a natural response. He changed the subject to her upcoming presentation, asked questions, listened to her animated description of her new data model. When she talked about her own work, the energy returned to her voice. The tightness around her eyes disappeared. She became the woman he'd fallen in love with, sharp, passionate, engaged. The discrepancy was instructive. The pattern repeated with almost mathematical precision over the next 6 weeks. When Adrian was quoted in the Portland Tribune about sustainable urban development, Olivia scrolled past the article on her phone without comment. He'd watched her do it over breakfast, had seen the headline appear in her news feed, watched her thumb flick upward to the next story. When he mentioned that the board had approved his proposal for the Riverside Greenway project, a 2-year initiative he'd spent months designing, she'd said, "That's nice," and returned her laptop. But when her colleague Jessica got engaged, Olivia spent 45 minutes on the phone, squealing with delight. Where her friend Marcus from college published a paper in a mid-tier economics journal, she'd texted Adrian 3 times about how proud she was of him. The asymmetry was stark. Adrian began documenting the pattern mentally, the way he'd learned to document everything important. Dates, contexts, responses. He wasn't angry. Anger was a luxury he'd trained himself out of years ago. Anger clouded judgment. What he felt instead was a cool, analytical clarity. Something was fundamentally broken in the mechanism of their relationship, and he needed to understand its nature before deciding how to address it. The breaking point came on a Saturday in November. Adrian had been invited to moderate a panel at the Pacific Northwest Development Conference, a significant professional honor. He'd mentioned it to Olivia 3 weeks in advance. She'd said she'd try to make it, but had a lot going on at work. The morning of the conference, she was still in bed when he left. He'd kissed her forehead, whispered that he hoped to see her there, received a mumbled response in return. The panel went exceptionally well. For experts in urban planning and sustainable development, a packed audience of about 200 people Questions that probe the real tensions in the field rather than lobbing softballs. Adrian guided the discussion with the same precision he brought to everything, knowing when to challenge, when to synthesize, when to let silence do the work. Afterward, during the networking reception, his phone buzzed. "Olivia, sorry, work thing came up. Can't make it. You do great, though." He read the message twice. The conference had been over for 20 minutes. She hadn't asked how it went, hadn't acknowledged that it was already finished. The message was performative concern, deployed too late to be meaningful. Adrian pocketed his phone and accepted congratulations from a woman who ran a nonprofit focused on affordable housing. They talked about potential collaboration. He exchanged cards with a city council member from Seattle. He did what he'd come to do, but something had crystallized in his mind, sharp and cold and undeniable. When he got home that evening, Olivia was curled up on the couch watching a cooking show, a glass of white wine on the side table. She looked up as he entered, smiled brightly. "Hey, how'd it go?" "It went well," he said, setting down his messenger bag. The panel seemed engaged. "Good questions." "That's great." She muted the TV. "I'm really sorry I couldn't make it. We had this emergency thing with the Henderson account, and I had to—" "You texted me after the conference ended," Adrian said quietly. She blinked. "What?" "You sent the work thing came up text at 4:15. The panel ended at 3:45. I'd been at the reception for half an hour when you messaged me." A flicker of something crossed her face. Annoyance, maybe, or being caught. "I didn't realize the exact timing. I was busy, Adrian." I said I was sorry. "Were you at work?" "What kind of question is that?" "A straightforward one." She stood up, color rising in her cheeks. "You're really going to interrogate me about this?" I apologized. "Work got crazy. It happens." Adrian remained very still, his voice level. "I'm not interrogating you. I'm asking if you were at work, because if you were, you would have known the conference ended at 4. You would have asked me how it went instead of wishing me luck on something that was already over. So now you're calling me a liar?" "I'm asking for clarity. This is ridiculous." She grabbed her wine glass, took a long sip. "I forgot the exact time. I'm sorry I'm not perfect like you, Adrian. Some of us have actual problems to deal with." There it was. The deflection, the attempt to reframe his observation as an attack, the pivot to victimhood. Classic gaslighting technique, except it wouldn't work on him. He'd seen this too many times in negotiations, from people trying to avoid accountability. "I'm going to take a walk," he said calmly. "We can talk when I get back." "Of course you are. Just walk away. I'll be back in 20 minutes. He left before she could respond, descended the stairs of their building, stepped out into the cool November evening. The streets of downtown Portland were busy with Saturday night crowds, people heading to dinner, to bars, to shows. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by the kind of calculation he was now running. Adrian walked to Waterfront Park, found a bench overlooking the river. The water was dark and swift, reflecting the city lights in fractured patterns. He sat down and allowed himself to think through the complete data set. Every achievement of his for the past 6 months had been met with either silence, diminishment, or absence. Every achievement of hers, he'd celebrated without reservation. When her successes and his successes existed in isolation, she was present for hers and absent for his. When others succeeded, she offered genuine enthusiasm. The pattern was specific and targeted. The conclusion was inescapable. His success threatened her in some fundamental way. Not because it affected her material circumstances. They kept their finances largely separate. Both earned good salaries. The threat was psychological. His wins made her feel like she was losing, even though they were playing entirely different games. He could confront her directly. He could suggest therapy. He could try to accommodate, make himself smaller, dim his own light to avoid triggering her insecurity. or he could acknowledge the fundamental incompatibility and act accordingly. Adrian had built his career on making difficult decisions cleanly, on seeing what needed to be done and doing it without equivocation. He'd ended business partnerships that weren't working. He'd walked away from deals that couldn't be saved. He'd learned early that clinging to failing arrangements out of sentiment or hope only multiplied the eventual damage. This was no different. He stood up from the bench and walked back to the apartment. Olivia was still on the couch, now 3/4 through the wine bottle. She looked up defensively as he entered. "I wasn't at work," she said before he could speak. "Okay, I didn't feel like going to your panel. I didn't want to sit there and watch everyone tell you how brilliant you are. Are you happy? Is that what you wanted to hear?" Adrian removed his jacket, hung it carefully on the hook by the door. "No," he said quietly, "but I appreciate the honesty. I'm a terrible person, right? That's what you're thinking. I'm thinking we need to talk. Actually talk." She laughed bitterly. "Here we go. The big relationship conversation. You're going to analyze me like one of your projects. When I closed the Riverside deal, you didn't speak to me for 2 days. I was busy. When I got the VP promotion, you called it luck and timing. I was trying to keep you humble. When I was quoted in the Tribune, you scrolled past the article without reading it. I watched you do it." She opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes were bright, whether from wine or tears he couldn't tell. "You're keeping score," she said. "That's what this is. You've been keeping some kind of ledger of my failures as a girlfriend." "I've been noticing a pattern," Adrian said evenly. "And the pattern is clear. My achievements make you withdraw. They make you uncomfortable. They make you want to minimize them or avoid them entirely. That's not." She stopped, looked away. "You don't understand what it's like. Tell me. Everything you touch turns to gold, Adrian. Everything. You propose an idea at work and the board approves it. You moderate a panel and you get quoted in newspapers. You walk into rooms and people listen to you. Do you know how exhausting it is to be around that?" "Exhausting," he repeated. "Being around someone who's successful is exhausting to you. When it's constant, yes. When it's this drumbeat of look what Adrian did, look what Adrian achieved. When I'm working just as hard and getting a fraction of the recognition, yes, it's fucking exhausting." There it was. The core of it, finally articulated. Not jealousy exactly, but resentment. She saw his success as a commentary on her own worth, a relative diminishment rather than an independent achievement. "I've celebrated every one of your wins," Adrian said quietly. "Every single one. Your promotion, your certification, your conference presentation. I was genuinely happy for you. It didn't diminish me, because you can afford to be generous. You're already at the top. I'm 32 years old. I'm not at the top of anything. I'm building a career, same as you. But you make it look easy, and when things come easily to you, it makes the rest of us feel like we're failing." Adrian absorbed this, turned it over in his mind. The logic was revealing. She'd constructed a zero-sum framework where his success necessarily implied her failure. Any evidence to the contrary, the fact that they worked in different fields, that her career was progressing well by any objective measure, couldn't penetrate that framework. "I need a partner who celebrates with me, not against me," he said. "This isn't working." The words hung in the air between them. Olivia's expression shifted from defensive to shocked. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we want different things from a relationship. You need someone whose success doesn't threaten you. I need someone who can be happy when good things happen to me. We're not those people for each other. You're breaking up with me? Over this. Over the fact that my achievements make you unhappy. Yes. Over the pattern of withdrawal and diminishment and absence that's been building for months. Over the fundamental incompatibility that creates." She stood up, suddenly energized. No, Adrian, you can't just decide this unilaterally. We've been together 3 years. We live together. You can't just analyze our relationship like it's a business deal and decide to terminate it. I'm not doing this to hurt you, he said. I'm doing this because I've watched you become less happy over the past 6 months. And I've realized that my presence in your life, specifically my success, is a source of pain for you. That's not sustainable. So what? You're doing this for my benefit? Is that the story you're telling yourself? I'm doing this for both of us. You deserve to be with someone you can celebrate without reservation. I deserve the same. Olivia's eyes were wet now, anger and sadness mixing. You're such a coward. You're so afraid of dealing with real emotions, real problems, that you just cut and run. Everything's a calculation with you. Everything's this cold logic. Would you prefer I yell? Plead? Make dramatic pronouncements? I prefer you actually fight for us. I did, Adrian said quietly. For 6 months, I tried to understand what was happening. I tried to be supportive, to give you space when you withdrew, to not make my successes into big deals. But the pattern didn't change. If anything, it intensified. And I'm not going to spend the next 5 years dimming my own light so you can feel better about yours. She stared at him, tears tracking down her cheeks now. I can change. I can work on it. We can go to counseling. Can you be genuinely happy when something good happens to me? Not performatively, not after reminding yourself you should be, but genuinely happy. The question landed hard. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked away. I don't know, she whispered. Then we're done. The next 3 weeks were logistically complex, but emotionally straightforward. The apartment was in both their names, but Adrian found a new place quickly, a smaller one-bedroom in the Pearl District, closer to his office. They divided their possessions with minimal conflict. Most of their things had remained separate anyway. Olivia oscillated between anger and bargaining, but Adrian remained consistent. He was calm, fair, and absolutely resolute. When she tried to rewrite history, suggesting the problem was his paranoia or his inability to handle her having a bad day, he simply restated the pattern. When she accused him of being cold, he acknowledged that he processed things differently than she did, but that didn't make his decision wrong. He didn't block her number or refuse to speak with her. He simply maintained his boundary. By the end of November, he was fully moved into his new apartment. It was quieter than the old place, with better light and a view of the city that he found clarifying. He bought new furniture, a proper desk, a comfortable reading chair, bookshelves that he filled with the volumes that had been in storage. His friends from work asked what happened. He gave them the abbreviated version. Incompatibility, different life goals, mutual decision. Only his friend Raymond, who'd known him since graduate school, got the fuller story over drinks at a dimly lit bar in the Alphabet District. So she couldn't handle you being successful, Raymond summarized, nursing a bourbon. She couldn't handle feeling like my success diminished her, Adrian corrected. There's a difference. Seems like a distinction without much practical difference. Maybe, but I think understanding the mechanism matters. She's not a bad person. She's insecure in a specific way, and I became a trigger for that insecurity. No amount of accommodation on my part was going to fix that. Raymond studied him over the rim of his glass. You doing okay? Honestly? Better than I expected. I miss the idea of the relationship more than the reality of what it had become. You're a strange man, Caldwell. Most people will be a mess right now. Adrian smiled slightly. Most people probably would have stayed longer, hoping it would magically improve. Fair point. December brought the kind of cold clarity that Adrian had always appreciated. His new morning routine involved coffee at a small cafe 2 blocks from his apartment, 15 minutes with a newspaper, then a walk to the office that gave him time to organize his thoughts for the day. On a Tuesday morning, scrolling through his phone while waiting for his coffee, he saw that Olivia had posted on social media for the first time in weeks. It was a photo of her with a group of friends at some kind of gallery opening, everyone holding wine glasses and smiling. The caption read, "Surrounding myself with people who lift me up. Grateful for my tribe." The subtext was obvious, a jab at him, a claim that he'd been pulling her down rather than lifting her up. Adrian looked at the photo for a moment, noted the forced brightness of her smile, then scrolled past. Let her have her narrative. He had no need to contest it. His coffee arrived. He paid, added cream, walked outside into the crisp morning air. The truth was, he felt lighter. The past 6 months had been like carrying a weight he hadn't fully acknowledged until he'd set it down. The constant calibration of how to share good news, the bracing for withdrawal or diminishment, the silent question of whether his achievements would trigger another round of passive hostility, all of it was gone. At work, when his assistant congratulated him on a positive mention in a regional business journal, he could simply say thank you without the accompanying mental calculation of how to minimize it before going home. When Raymond invited him to a New Year's party and mentioned that there would be interesting people there, Adrian felt the first stirring of curiosity about what might come next rather than obligation to a present that wasn't working. The party was in a converted warehouse space in the industrial district, about 60 people mingling around high-top tables and a well-stocked bar. Raymond introduced him to a half-dozen people in quick succession: a documentary filmmaker, a tech startup founder, a professor of environmental science, a woman named Kate who ran a nonprofit focused on urban food systems. Kate was sharp-witted and direct, with an unself-conscious laugh and a tendency to challenge assumptions. They ended up in a corner talking about the intersection of land use policy and food access for nearly an hour. "So you're the guy making sure Portland doesn't turn into a concrete hellscape," she said, grinning. "I'm one of many people trying to balance development and livability," Adrian said. "It's harder than it sounds. I bet. Everyone wants progress, but nobody wants change. That's the paradox, yes. Raymond mentioned you just went through a breakup. Sorry if that's too direct." Adrian appreciated the directness. "I did. It was the right call. Good for you. Too many people stay in things that don't work out of inertia. What about you? Are you staying or going in things that may or may not work?" She laughed. Direct right back. "I like it. I'm very single and very okay with it. My last relationship ended because he wanted me to be less intense about my work. Wanted me to find balance, which really meant making his discomfort with my passion my problem to solve." "Sounds familiar," Adrian said. "Yeah? Your ex wanted you to dim your light." The phrase landed with unexpected precision. "Something like that. Well," Kate raised her glass, "here's to people who can't handle us at our brightest. May they find partners who prefer things dim." Adrian clinked his glass against hers. "And here's to finding people who bring sunglasses instead of curtains." She grinned. "That's a good line. I'm stealing that." They talked for another hour. When the party wound down, they exchanged numbers. No pretense, no games. Just two people who'd enjoyed a conversation and wanted to continue it sometime. Walking home through the cold December night, Adrian felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: uncomplicated optimism. Not about Kate specifically, it was too early for that, but about the basic framework of what came next. He'd spent 3 years in a relationship where his success was treated as a problem to be managed, where growth was met with withdrawal, where celebration was conditional on not overshadowing. That was done now. What came next would be built on different foundations, or it wouldn't be built at all. On New Year's Eve, Adrian declined several party invitations and spent the evening in his apartment, reading and listening to music. At midnight, he poured himself a modest scotch and stood at his window, watching fireworks bloom over the city in bright, temporary flowers. His phone buzzed. A text from Kate. "Happy New Year. Still planning to grab coffee this week?" He typed back, "Absolutely. Wednesday work. Perfect. Looking forward to it." Adrian smiled, set down his phone, returned his attention to the window. The fireworks were already fading, smoke drifting across the lights of downtown. The old year was gone. The new one was here. And for the first time in months, he felt like he was moving towards something rather than managing around something. It was, he thought, a good place to start. Coffee with Kate turned into dinner the following week. Dinner turned into a weekend hike in the Columbia River Gorge. The hike turned into a standing Sunday morning tradition of farmers market browsing, followed by cooking together at whichever apartment was more convenient. Kate was the opposite of Olivia in every meaningful way. When Adrian told her about a successful pitch to the city council, she wanted to hear every detail, asked sharp questions about the implementation strategy, suggested a connection with someone at her nonprofit who might be a useful ally. When her organization secured a major grant, Adrian took her to dinner and listened to her animated description of how they'd scale their programming, what obstacles they'd overcome, what this meant for their expansion plans. Her excitement fed his excitement. Her questions sharpened his thinking. When she succeeded, he felt genuine joy. When he succeeded, she felt the same. He realized what partnership was supposed to feel like. Not a zero-sum competition for limited emotional resources, but a positive feedback loop where each person's growth created space for the others. "You're different than I expected," Kate said one Sunday in late February as they prepped vegetables in his kitchen. "How so?" "Raymond told me you were scary smart and a little intense. I was expecting someone more. I don't know, rigid, but you're actually really present." "I can be rigid," Adrian admitted. "Ask anyone who's been in a business negotiation with me. But not in your personal life. I'm decisive in my personal life. That's different than rigid." "What's the difference?" He considered while dicing an onion. "Rigid is refusing to adapt when circumstances change. Decisive is knowing when something isn't working and acting on that knowledge. Like your last relationship. Like my last relationship." Kate was quiet for a moment, focusing on the bell pepper she was slicing. "Can I ask what happened? You've never really told me the full story." Adrian set down his knife and leaned against the counter. "She couldn't be happy when good things happened to me. She'd withdraw, or minimize the achievement, or find ways to avoid being present for it. I gave it 6 months to see if the pattern would change. It didn't, so I ended it. Just like that. Just like that. No big fight, no dramatic ultimatum. I told her I needed a partner who could celebrate with me, not against me. That this wasn't working. She tried to argue, but I was certain. We divided the apartment. I moved out. We went our separate ways." Kate studied him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You make it sound very clean." "It was emotionally difficult, yes, but logistically and decisionally clean. Most people can't do that. Most people drag things out, hope they'll improve, have the same fight 17 times. Most people aren't comfortable with difficult decisions. And you are. I've had practice." She smiled, returned to her pepper. "I'm glad you're comfortable with difficult decisions, because I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to be honest with me about whether it changes anything." Adrian felt a flicker of apprehension, but kept his voice level. "Okay, I got offered a position in Seattle, director of programming for a regional food security organization. It's a huge opportunity. More funding, bigger scope, real chance to influence policy at the state level." "That's incredible, Kate. Congratulations. It will mean moving 3 hours away." Ah, there it was. The test, or maybe just the reality check. They've been seeing each other for 2 months. Long enough to know this was something real, not long enough to have navigated any major obstacles. "When do you need to decide?" he asked. 2 weeks. Adrian poured them both water, handed her a glass, took a moment to think. This was the kind of inflection point where many people would panic or make grand gestures or try to negotiate outcomes that served only their own interests. He didn't want to be that person. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "Honestly, I want to take it. It's the job I've been building toward for 5 years. But I also really like what's happening here." She gestured between them. "With us. Those don't have to be mutually exclusive. Portland to Seattle is 3 hours. That's not nothing. It's also not impossible. People manage longer distances. Would you want to?" Adrian set down his water glass. "I'm not going to ask you to turn down a career opportunity for a 2-month relationship. That would be absurd. But I'm also not ready to end this just because geography gets slightly more complicated." "Slightly?" "Seattle has an airport. Portland has an airport. I have vacation days and a flexible schedule. You'll presumably have weekends. If we both want this to work, we'll figure it out." Kate smiled a little tentatively. "You're not worried it'll fizzle out?" "It might. Long distance is hard. But you're not taking your dream job because you're afraid of that outcome seems like the worst alternative. At least if we try and it doesn't work, you'll still have the job you wanted." "Very logical. Is that a criticism?" "No," she said softly. "It's actually really refreshing. My ex would have made this whole thing about him, about how I was abandoning him or forcing him to choose between his life and our relationship or some other manufactured drama. Your ex sounds exhausting." "He was." "You're not." Adrian pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. "Take the job. We'll figure out the rest." Kate moved to Seattle in March. They settled into a rhythm, alternating weekends, phone calls most evenings, texts throughout the day that were substantive rather than performative. When she had a win at work, Adrian heard about it in detail. When he successfully navigated a particularly complex zoning dispute, she wanted to understand the whole chess match. The distance was inconvenient, but not insurmountable. And something about the space between visits made the time together more intentional. They didn't waste hours in ambient coexistence. They talked, explored new restaurants, hiked, attended events that one or the other wanted to share. In May, Adrian's firm opened a Seattle office. His boss asked if he'd be interested in leading the expansion. He said yes before the full question was even asked. When he told Kate over dinner at a waterfront restaurant, she set down her fork and stared at him. "You're moving to Seattle? If that's okay with you." "If it's okay with me?" "Adrian, this is huge. Is this because of me?" "It's because the opportunity makes sense for my career and also happens to solve a logistical problem in my personal life. Those motivations aren't in conflict. But you love Portland. I like Portland. I love my work. I could do my work from Seattle just as well, probably better given the growth trajectory of the market here. And yes, I love you, and being in the same city as you sounds significantly better than the current arrangement." She blinked. "You love me. Was that not clear?" "You've never said it." "I'm saying it now." Kate laughed, a little shakily. "You're impossible. You just dropped this massive life change, and then I love you in the same breath like you're commenting on the weather. Would you prefer a more elaborate delivery?" "I'd prefer you kiss me and then tell me more about this Seattle office." He did both. By August, Adrian was fully established in Seattle. The new office was smaller but agile, and he had the autonomy to build the team and approach from scratch. It was the kind of professional challenge he thrived on. High stakes, high visibility, lots of moving parts to coordinate. Kate's organization was thriving under her leadership. She'd secured 2 major grants and expanded their programming into 3 new counties. They'd celebrated each milestone, hers and his, with the easy enthusiasm of people who understood that success wasn't finite. One Saturday morning, lying in bed in the apartment they decided to share, Kate propped herself up on one elbow and looked at him thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever think about your ex? About how different things are now?" Adrian considered the question. "Sometimes. Not often." "What do you think when you do?" I think I made the right decision. And I think she probably did too, in the end. We weren't right for each other. The longer we stayed together, the more we would have resented each other. Do you think she sees it that way? I don't know. I hope so. Kate was quiet for a moment. I saw her on social media last week. Mutual friends post. She's dating someone new. Good for her. You really mean that? I do. She deserves to be happy. Just not with me. Kate smiled, traced a finger along his jawline. You know what I love about you? Tell me. You don't need me to be smaller, so you can feel bigger. And you don't get smaller when I'm big. We just coexist at whatever size we are. That's called being compatible. It's rarer than you'd think. Adrian pulled her closer. Then I'm glad we found it. Outside, Seattle was waking up. The sounds of traffic, distant construction, the city moving through its Saturday morning routines. Inside, in this specific moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Adrian had built his life on seeing patterns, making decisions, and following through. He'd learned to recognize when something wasn't working and to act on that recognition without hesitation or sentimentality. But he'd also learned, more recently, to recognize when something was working, to appreciate the difference between a relationship that drained energy and one that generated it, between a partner who needed him dimmed and one who handed him brighter bulbs. He'd chosen correctly, both in ending what needed to end and in building what deserved to be built. It was, he thought, as close to a perfect calculation as real life allowed. And that was more than enough.
Thanks for listening.